everything we see around us seems very real, very solid, very filled with its own significance, when in fact all these things are merely composed of parts. They arise due to causes and conditions, and they exist due to being conceived and labeled. So from their own side, they have no kind of real existence at all. So whereas they appear very true, very real, in fact that appearance is false. That appearance is like an illusion, in that things appear to exist one way, but they don't exist in that way at all. So seeing that the things around us are deceptive in terms of how they appear to exist and how they actually exist, then that gives us some space, some mental space in how we relate to them, because we don't need to make everything, including ourselves, so solid and concrete. We don't need to project a lot of meaning on things that they don't actually have from their own side. So with this kind of view, then let's listen to the teachings, knowing that although things don't have any essence from their own side, they do exist as illusion-like. It's not that they're totally non-existent, and so we relate to them. We have to relate to them in a correct way, in a way that's filled with kindness and tolerance and generosity. So it's a difficult balance to reach, to see how these things have no essence of their own, and yet we can't just do anything we want and think that it's all the same and it doesn't matter. Because karma and its effects still function, even though things are like illusions. So with an illusion-like motivation to help illusion-like sentient beings to attain full awakening that is also like an illusion, then let's listen to the teachings that are similarly like illusions. So even though we're going through a section of Precious Garland that's dealing with royal policy and political policy, very adept topic for the final night of the Democratic National Convention, let's remember that all these things are not solid and concrete. And yet, they exist and we have to take care of them. Okay, so last time we did verse 322, but I want to review it. So verse 322 said, for any dharma site, because remember Nagarjuna had recommended that the king build all sorts of dharma sites, institutions, foundations, and to also continue supporting those that were built by previous kings. Okay, so for every dharma site, appoint dharma teachers who are energetic, free of greed, knowledgeable, pious, and who will not hinder those practicing there. It said officials of the Dharma, but that doesn't make any sense. And the explanation talks about teachers and Dharma leaders, not bureaucrats. Okay, when I hear official, I think of like a bureaucrat in an office, but that's not what is being discussed here. Okay. Okay, appoint Dharma teachers who are yeah. Okay, so these teachers should be energetic. Yeah, so people who like to study, who like to practice, who are not kind of lazy and sleep late and get easily distracted. People free of greed, okay? And why is that mentioned here? What is there to be greedy about when you're in the role of a Dharma teacher? Well, you know, it's very easy because people praise you, they like the teachings, they give you gifts, and it's very easy to get arrogant and start thinking that we're really kind of hot stuff. You know, oh, I'm such a good teacher, look at, people give me so many gifts, so many people like me, how many people came to my course? Oh, it was more people that came than the number of people that came to this other person's course. Or, oh, they got more people at their course. I didn't get very many. Oh dear, maybe I'm not very good. People don't like me. You know? So there's all sorts of ego machinations that can, you know, go around. And especially if, you know, people like, first of all, they say, we like your teachings. They're not our teachings. Yeah, they're the Buddha's teachings. So it's not that people like our teachings. They like the Buddha's teachings. Mm-hmm. Second of all, oh, you're a great teacher. We're not teachers. Okay, we're students. We're students of the Dharma until we become fully awakened. Yeah. Once in a while we're in the role of teaching. But that's only a temporary role. We are not teachers. We are students. Okay? It's very easy to start thinking of yourself as a teacher, like it's a career, a profession. I'm a Dharma teacher by profession. Yeah? Slippery slope. Very slippery slope. Okay? So it's very crucial, you know, to always have an attitude of humility and see that what we're teaching are not our teachings. Okay? If the person likes them, we should rejoice that they benefit, not rejoice that we're a special person because people like what we say. Okay? So more than anything, when you're in that role of being a teacher, you should have an attitude of being of service to sentient beings and not think, oh, I'm teaching, then those people will give me things. So that's why it says not be greedy, because then it's very easy, you know, because people come up and, oh, what can I get for you? What do you need? Oh, well, I could use this, I could use that, I could use the other thing. what about a new this? What about a new that? Okay? Yeah? And it becomes very easy to then have a lot of wants and needs, okay, which just increase our greed and, are not actually, then our mind is not in accord with the Dharma, okay? So it's something to be really attentive and careful about, because sometimes you meet people who are pretty full of themselves, yeah, and then also people who get jealous. If you see teaching the Dharma as a career, as you're a professional doing this, then, you want to be better than everybody else. Yeah? And so, sometimes when you read the first bodhisattva, root bodhisattva vow, praising others, praising oneself and criticizing others, yeah, that's applying particularly when we're in the role of being a teacher, because it's so easy to say, I know this better than somebody else. I've had the transmission from someone, so I can give you a more complete explanation. That person over there, they don't know as much. How they practice isn't very sophisticated. You should come and be my student. Yeah? So, boy, that's a break of a root bodhisattva vow. Okay, so quite serious. Yeah, and it's very easy to do. And it's very easy in one's mind to be jealous of other people, who have more teachers, who have more students, who go more places, who, the publicity in the Buddhist magazines is greater for them than it is for you, all these kinds of things. So it's very important to be free of greed, and not just greed for offering some material things, but greed for reputation, greed for thinking that now I'm somebody. Because thinking now I'm somebody when we're nobody, when we don't inherently exist, is really rather stupid, isn't it? Yeah. Now I've earned my status, and people, they know who I am, and, who's that big I that, thinks they're so important because they repeated a few words that they heard from their own teacher. Yeah. Okay. So, they say if you're in that position and somebody comes and praises you, you imagine the Buddha on your head or in your heart, and you think they're praising the Buddha. And in fact, they are, because it has nothing to do with us. Okay? Yeah, so people who are energetic, free of greed, knowledgeable. And along with being knowledgeable means saying what you don't know. Yeah? And, of course, when we have some ego involved in giving teachings, the last thing we want to say is, I don't know. We want to change the topic, humiliate the person who asked the question, tell them they don't understand something, anything but say, I don't know. Isn't it? Because, we want to appear knowledgeable because our reputation is at stake. So, along these lines, there's two things that His Holiness says, or one thing he says, one thing I observed. One is he doesn't see himself as a teacher. He sees himself as an older brother in the Dharma who's just sharing what he knows with his younger siblings. And that's a very nice attitude, You're an older sibling helping your younger sibling. No reason for ego. to arise there. Because it's kind of your duty, isn't it, if you're an older sibling, to help the younger siblings. It'd be rather awful if you didn't. And then also in terms of saying we don't know, I remember in 1989 being at a panel, well, I was being at a conference where His Holiness was on a panel of experts. I forget what the topic was. But during one of the sessions, a question had come up, and the people, somebody addressed it to His Holiness. And there were maybe 3,000 people watching this, and His Holiness thought about the question, and then he said, I don't know. And then he looked at the other experts on the panel, and he said, what do you people think? And the hall got so quiet, because they regarded him as the expert of the experts. And he said, I don't know. And then he not only said, I don't know, he asked other people to give the answer. Yeah. So it's such a good example of how little, attachment to reputation His Holiness had in this whole process, and how much respect he had for other people, even, the other presenters who, in my eyes, didn't approximate His Holiness's knowledge at all. But still he was respectful and asked their thoughts about it. Okay, so such a person must also be pious, so humble, have faith and trust in the three jewels. If you don't have much faith and trust, but you're teaching, that's not so good for the students, because it's quite likely that you might make errors or convey your doubt to the students. So there has to be some degree of faith and trust in the three jewels. Sometimes they talk about, when they talk about the three pots, the three ways of listening to teachings. So one of the pots is is like a pot that's dirty inside. So they say that's like a person who goes to teachings so that they can get information and then go out and teach it to other people and get some status and offerings from that. So the dirt inside that pot is a rotten motivation, forgetting the teachings. So not really having faith, or not really wanting to practice the teachings, just wanting to get information so that then you can look good when you go out and talk to other people. Look how much I know, blah, 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 blah. And you rattle it off. Okay. Knowledgeable, pious, and who do not hinder those practicing there. Okay, so people who are open to others, who don't insult them, who are available, because people will come to ask questions, they'll come for counseling, they'll ask you for help. And then you also have to be able to not only manage the people, but sometimes manage the offerings to the Sangha without taking more than your own share. Okay. Then, verse 323. So, appoint ministers. We're moving into a different section here, where he's going to talk about government ministers. But actually, a lot of what he says when he's talking about running the government, it also applies to running any kind of institution, a monastery or a corporation or anything, So he says, appoint ministers, policy experts who are pious, polite, and pure, devoted, courageous, of good family, ethically outstanding, and grateful. Okay, so you're the president, or the king, or you're the CEO, or you're the whatever leader it is, okay? So you must be familiar with the customs of the world and know something, here especially for government ministers, something about geography, climate, history, foreign affairs, culture, things about other countries and how they function, how the people think, what their history is, so what things they may be sensitive about. Okay. This is so interesting when you would apply it to the present election, don't you? Isn't it? I mean, here's Nagarjuna is just saying it. Then you check up and decide who you're going to vote for. Okay, so policy experts. You want to have ministers and policy experts, not family members who don't know anything about these issues. You need to have people who are knowledgeable about these issues, and you yourself need to be knowledgeable, okay? People who are humble, who are going to actually help you without trying to manipulate you. They're polite. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. You don't want to have ministers, policy experts, let alone candidates who are impolite. I mean, how's that going to work when you're trying to run a government and the people who represent your country are impolite? That's not going to go over well. Yeah. And that's why you really need to know a lot about different cultures and how people function, because it's quite easy to do impolite things in another culture because you're just not aware of it. Okay? And pure, so they should have a good motivation, a pure motivation. Okay, they're devoted, so they're devoted to the country, they're devoted to the king, to the president, to the leader, whoever it is. Yeah, and so, they're not out to gain something for themselves. They're out to offer service to the country and to the leader, or whatever organization you're working in. This person has a mind of offering service, not of using the organization or the country or whatever to elevate themselves. Okay, courageous, they need to know how to speak the truth. Yeah, even when it may not be so pleasant, and how to speak the truth but in a tactful way so other people can hear it. They need to be of good family. Okay, so they need to be people who were raised to be tolerant, to be respectful of other people, to be courteous of other people. It doesn't mean that your family has to have a high rank. It means that, kind of how you were raised, you're respectful, you're sensitive. Yeah, you're not a bull in the china shop. Okay, ethically outstanding, definitely. I mean, you imagine having government ministers who are not ethically outstanding? We've certainly had enough of those, haven't we, throughout history? And boy, one way to make a mess. Okay, and grateful. So grateful to the leader, grateful to their staff members, grateful to the people they deal with. In other words, not seeing themselves as some kind of independent entity of, I'm in the leadership position, right? I'm the king's left-hand person, and, I'm high leadership, and you got to listen to me. Okay? But they should be able to negotiate policies, enforce policies, listen to what the actual leader wants and enact those wishes. Okay, have good intentions, not carry grudges. Can you imagine having a minister or somebody that you delegate a task to who has a grudge against whoever it is that they have to deal with? That's not going to work. Okay? Um, okay. So they should be pure in that they only act in ways that benefit others and not just themselves. Okay. Um, yeah. And in general, have excellent behavior of body, speech, and mind, with a loving and friendly way of approaching people, because they're representing the whole organization or the whole country. Yeah. So it's kind of like here in the Abbey, if you're somebody's buddy, you have a special responsibility to be like that, because how, somebody who's new to the Dharma, what they think about the Dharma, how they experience the Dharma is going to be filtered through their first interaction with somebody who is helping them, to find where to sit and how to sit and what page number the prayers are on and all these kinds of things. Okay. So basically, whether you're a buddy, whether you're the offering service coordinator, whether you're working in the kitchen, you're representing the Abbey, you're representing the Dharma, and so how you act is going to influence whether people have faith in the Dharma or whether they just see, oh, this monastery is just so hierarchical and everybody's bossy and they're inflexible and all they do is come in and say, do this, do that. And one says, do this, and the other one says, do that. And I don't know which one to do. And when I ask a question, they all just say, do what I say. So I do what this one says, and that one's unhappy, and I do what that one says, and this one's unhappy, and they all blame me because I don't follow instructions. I think some guests have had that experience here. Yeah? So I think we need to be careful about that. Okay, so to have, a friendly attitude, the minister representative sometimes may need to be a bit firm. If there's somebody who's really way out, you can't just let them continue to be way out. You have to bring them in. Yeah, and so, sometimes in the community we've had situations where we've had to deal with people in a quite firm manner. Okay. Then the next verse, 324, is about appointing military generals. So all the Bernie Sanders followers out in the audience are going to go, military generals? Why is Nagarjuna saying we should have generals? Why is he saying we should have a military? We're Buddhist. We don't believe in that stuff. Yeah? Does part of you say that? Part of me says that. Oh. But he's talking in a practical way to the king. Yeah? So he has to talk in this practical way, because the king is definitely going to have an army and definitely going to have generals no matter what Nagarjuna says. So he might as well teach, explain to him the qualities of a good general. Okay, so appoint military advisors who don't have the hiccups in mid-sentence. Appoint military advisors who are generous. This doesn't mean giving away all the military equipment, but somebody, who has a generous spirit, who treats the people in the military properly, and doesn't just use them and discard them, afterwards. Okay, so they're generous, unattached. Yeah, so they don't have a strong attachment to their body and their possessions. Yeah, they're heroic. Okay, but they're heroic also in the sense that they must do everything at all possible to avoid violent confrontation. And if it comes, then they have to be brave when the time comes to fight. But first, the general has to, in all possible ways, avoid any kind of violent confrontation. Okay, they should be polite to others. I guess that doesn't mean with the enemy. Yeah. And definitely have a fond feeling for their commander-in-chief. Okay, the material, who properly use resources are steadfast, always vigilant, and pious. Okay, so the generals must use the material resources and the human resources wisely, and in within a reasonable way. They shouldn't act recklessly, endangering their troops' lives when it's not necessary, wasting, resources or wasting food or whatever. They should not be taking food for the soldiers and selling it to somebody else and keeping the money for themselves. Okay? So when there's need, they take what's necessary, but within moderation. And they also know how to delegate authority. So they know how to lead and inspire and guide, but they also know how to delegate authority to other people. Okay? So they should have the ability to be steadfast, to have a clear mind even when there's danger, even when there's chaos around, because people's lives are depending on them. So they should be able to think clearly, make good decisions, and not fall under the sway of other people who don't have wisdom. Okay, because if you're a military leader and you let somebody who is not very learned in those ways counsel you, then you could make very bad decisions that endanger your troops or that wind up killing more people than necessary, or wind up killing anybody when there's no need for any conflict to start with. Okay, so they should be intelligent, be able to discriminate what's right and wrong, and then be conscientious and behave correctly. Yeah, and not abuse power, so not, threaten others beneath their rank or threaten citizens of the country, threaten, citizens of whoever you're battling. Okay. On a physical level, they should be fit, so no intoxicants whatsoever. Yeah. And I would say the cadets and the soldiers also, no intoxicants. That's not going to be good. Okay, so those are qualities to look for when you're appointing a military general, all of you who are thinking of appointing military generals. Okay. The next verse, 325, is about appointing treasurers and other officials. Okay, so the Department of the Treasury, or, the ones who raise the interest rate, who print money, who, try and balance the books, who do the accounting of whatever organization you're in. Okay, so I'm explaining this in terms of the kingdom, but relate it to any organization, because So appoint as officials elders that behave in accord with Dharma and are pure. Okay, so they know the Dharma, they have a gentle nature, they're friendly, they're wise, they don't get irritated. Because if you're a treasurer or you have to collect the taxes, people are going to come to you and they don't want to pay their taxes, or people are going to come to you and say, the king owes such and such money for this or that. So you have to be a tactful person who's able to get along with others and not just scream at them when they don't want to give you the taxes and when they want something from you. Okay? So they should remember the kindness of others and cherish living beings and be more concerned with the welfare of the other people in the kingdom than with their own welfare. Okay? So they need to be skillful and know what to do, and they need to be, erudite. Yeah, so they need, if you're balancing books or writing a budget, you need to know how to do it and not just kind of fake it. Somebody who's organized, Mamma mia, if you have somebody keeping the books who's not organized, it's a disaster. Yeah. The Abbey we're so fortunate. We've had, a bookkeeper and an accountant, the same one since we started 13, 14 years ago, who are incredibly honest, well organized, very skillful. We've been very, very blessed in that way because, if people bungle, they make a payment twice, they pay the wrong amount, they don't keep the books right, and they take it out of the wrong account. Oh my goodness, then you have so many problems. Or they write checks for themselves in the process of it. Yeah, so we've, our accountant actually was the one who set up our financial structure in the Abbey. It's good for people to know this. So the way it's set up is that the people who sign checks, who can dole out the money, give out the money, pay bills and so on, do not have access to the accounting books. So they can't cook the books. The people who do the accounting books do not sign on any of our accounts. So they cannot write checks, and they do not our accountant does not handle any cash either. So, either from the view of the bookkeeper or from the viewpoint of the accountant, there's no way for things to be misused. And we have a very honest office manager who counts the money with another person there, which is also important, some churches and so on, you have somebody taking the money from the donation box, and it's one for the church and one for me, and one for the church and one for me, and again, that creates incredible negative karma, stealing from the 3 jewels is especially negative karma. Okay, so they have to be erudite, honest, organized, impartial, not favoring themselves, not favoring their friends, not saying, oh, well, the monastery or, the kingdom, whatever it is, we have a little bit extra. My friend needs a loan for this month, so I'll loan the group's money to my personal friend. We never do that. Okay, that's Mickey Mouse generosity. Okay, so Khenzo Rinpoche comments, it's not easy to find such people, but as much as possible, the king should appoint officials with these qualities. Yeah, and it's true, it's not easy to find people who are squeaky clean and very kind. Okay, and then officials in general, they should be able to discriminate between what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. When a new situation suddenly comes in, they need to be able to think about it and make a quick decision if a quick decision is called for. Okay, so they need to be learned in whatever field they're managing, and also be good administrators. And the thing is that somebody who is good in that field is not necessarily going to be a good administrator. Yeah, we often, that's often how things work in the world. You start out as a worker and then you work yourself up into management positions. The idea being that if you've worked the field, then as a manager, you should know how it works. But to be a manager, you need more than knowledge just about that field. Okay? You need to be able to think clearly, to know how to work with people, how to encourage some people, how to be firm with other people. You need to know how to be organized and fair and impartial so that everybody that you're managing is working well. You need to be financially responsible. Yeah, so there's all sorts of other skills required for management positions that you don't necessarily have just because you know that particular field. Okay? Yes, you were in management, you know very well, uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, if somebody doesn't know all those other things, yeah, it becomes more than interesting. How about messy? Yeah. Yeah. So, so I think, we have to look closely and not just think that, management is a higher position. Management requires different skills, yeah? And the people who are doing the work have other skills. Very often they have other skills. Of course, it's nice if they know the field they're managing. It really helps them to, empathize and so on with the people in that department. But like you said, may involve legal issues, financial issues, PR issues, interdepartmental issues. There's so much going on. Yeah, and politics as well, definitely. Yeah. So you need a lot of background. Okay. So you don't want somebody who has a lot of inappropriate thoughts, who's not conscientious, who's very forgetful, who acts foolishly, who blames others when they, when they don't do their own job well. Okay, so they have to treat other people in an impartial way without being biased, and without being reckless with the endangering the king, endangering the country. Okay, so not endanger either the resources or the well-being of the people that they're serving. Okay, and then as polite people, they do their jobs without turmoil or contention, without arguing, without blaming, without putting their responsibility on somebody else. Which is very hard to find people like this. Because, when we forget something, or we do a bad job and somebody says, what about this? What's the first thing we do? We make an excuse, don't we? Yeah. Oh, I was just about to do that. Actually, we've totally forgotten. Or I sent you that before. Maybe not. Yeah, whatever it is. Or, oh, I didn't get around to it because this. We always have an excuse. We always blame somebody else. Yeah? So here it's talking about somebody who the king can actually talk to in an honest way and communicate with without having to, go through clouds and fog and smoke to get to what the issue is, because the other person keeps diverting it to something else. Okay? But Kenza Rinpoche says, of course, do not expect them to be perfect. Being human, they will err at times. Okay. Which is true. So you need to have incredible patience. Yeah. But then, if you're in the position of management or being an official, sometimes you have to fire people. Yeah, you have to rearrange positions or do something because, and if you're in that position, what you have, instead of just saying to somebody, you're really lousy, you're not doing this job, I'm firing you. But it's like you have skills, but the skills you have don't match the skills needed for this position. Yeah? So we need people with certain skills. You don't have these, we're going to have to put you in another department, or we recommend you look for another job or whatever, where your skills can be used.
Another situation that happens also in terms of management is that people are given jobs without looking at all the requirements, like Nagarjuna is doing here with the training, giving them advice of these are the skill set that is needed in particular positions. But in many organizations, particularly from the public sector, which I come from, is that you get the first body that you can to fill a hole without really looking at does this person have the skill set that matches this position?
Yeah.
When they fail, it's not our fault for hiring them, it's their fault for not doing a good job, and then, they are fired. But
Yeah, okay. So that's a good point too, that if you're in management, you just take the first person to fill the position without really seeing if that person has the skills needed to actually do a good job. And again, that's the responsibility of management too, not just, you tell somebody who doesn't know how to cook to go in and run the kitchen without giving them any advice or, describing to them how the kitchen's run or anything like that. No, I mean, I'm just making it for us, but it could be something else. Yeah. But sometimes here at the Abbey, people get jobs for which they have no training at all, and it is on-the-job training. Yeah? Yeah? So, we have people with a wide variety of skills, so we try and put people with what they're good with, but sometimes we need something done and nobody has had previous training, so yeah, it's on-the-job training time. What's worse is when the leader doesn't know the skills either and can't train you and just says, go ask so-and-so. Well, sometimes you have to. It would be worse if the leader tried to train somebody when they don't even know themselves. Yeah. Okay. Then 326. Each month, listen to their reports of all income and expenses. Having listened, tell them all that should be done for the Dharma sites and so on. Okay, so you've appointed your ministers, your generals, your treasurers, all your other officials. Okay, but you can't just say, okay, go out and do the job. Ciao, fellows. You need to supervise. Supervision is again, that's part of management, but it requires a lot of tact and a lot of skill, because people need supervision, and you need to be able to coordinate between people doing different jobs, and some people want a lot of supervision and help, and other people feel like you're just leaning over, micromanaging every time you ask them a question. So it's a difficult thing to kind of figure out how to do in a skillful way. Okay, so here he's saying, each month listen to their report. Actually, I'm waiting for the website report. By the way, yeah, every 2 weeks, right? Okay, so, have them report to you incomes and expenses, then listen and then tell them, what they need to do. You know, that give them further instructions on, on duties that, they're going to need to do in the upcoming period of time. Okay, so you really need to see if things are running smoothly. Ask if somebody needs help. Yeah, and then if somebody needs help, they need to say so. Sometimes our pride won't let us say we need help, but it's much better if we say we need help before we reach the due date. Uh-huh.
Is this advising him to supervise even the Dharma teachers or not?
Well, he's supervising. The people who are going to be the directors of the Dharma centers, the administrators of the Dharma centers, to supervise them, okay? But then hopefully those people will also report on what the teachers are doing, if the teachers are teaching properly and guiding people properly and so on. Yeah. Actually, in Buddhism, the Buddha was very clear. He didn't want the Sangha under government control. Yeah, the Sangha has its own rules and its own management, and he didn't want government interference. Of course, historically, that's also always been a big challenge for the Sangha, because, first of all, if you, in ancient societies, there were, autocratic rulers and kings, and if you weren't on their good side, they would wipe out the religion. They'd come in and just tear down your monasteries, burn your books, do whatever they want with the monastics. So you had to keep on the good side of the government. Also, the government, many of the government people were the benefactors to the monastery. So you needed to keep on their good side for that reason too, so that they don't interfere with you, and also so that the kings and the officials would support the monasteries. Yeah. Nowadays, in a democratic society, it works a little bit different, because government doesn't support us. We're kind of on our own. Yeah. But I think that's much better because, for example, the monastics in ancient China, why did so many Zen practitioners or Chan practitioners go out to the mountains? Because when they stayed in the city, then they got drawn into politics and all this kind of stuff, because, there were these different political parties. There were the Confucian people, there were the emperor's people, there were all these different groups, and they had to negotiate between all of them in order to keep the monasteries open and be able to give teachings. And when you got an emperor who didn't like the Dharma, then, the Sangha was really harassed, and the existence of the Dharma, was endangered. Okay, that's why, in the dedication verses we do after lunch, there's one where it says leaders who support religious freedom. Actually, that said kings. The usual word is kings. And I changed it to leaders who support, religious freedom, because that's the most important thing for us. If we live in a country where there's no religious freedom, then we're in big trouble, or where the government doesn't separate church and state, and so they're trying to convert you all the time and make you do things certain ways. Yeah, so I think the separation of church and state is really crucial. Mm. Okay. Okay. Then 327. If you rule for the sake of Dharma and not for fame or out of desire, then it will have a most meaningful result. Otherwise, your rule will be disastrous. He doesn't mince words, does he? So, essentially what the king's doing, what the Nagarjuna is doing is he's saying to the king, I gave you all these instructions so that you can rule according to the Dharma, not, for your own fame as a king, not to enlarge your storehouse and your treasury, but so that you can, govern according to the Dharma and help your subjects learn the Dharma and practice the Dharma. So if you govern as I've instructed, Nagarjuna says, then you're, and you don't have a polluted motivation for fame or material things, then you'll have a very good result. Your kingdom will be peaceful. Your the people that you rule will be content. They'll be happy. You won't have any revolts, in the middle of the kingdom. Whereas if you are greedy and just, you're greedy for fame, you're greedy for material things, you exploit the people in the kingdom, you yourself don't manage the government very well, then, or you have a polluted motivation, you want to be King Kong, and be the one, yes, the one who's going to save the country, because nobody else can save the country but you. If you have that kind of thing and that kind of mental attitude, you're going to create a lot of negative karma. There's going to be problems in your kingdom. And by creating so much negative karma, you'll wind up with a lower rebirth. So it's not helpful now or in the future to have wrong motivations. Okay. Okay. So then 328, here we're going to start talking about governing without compromising your Dharma principles. Difficult. Okay. So 328 says, King, wake up. Wake up, don't doze off. Yeah. Hear how in this world, where the one usually destroys the other. Okay, so king, hear how in this world, where the one usually destroys the other, you can still have both the Dharma and a kingdom. Okay? So in this world, usually if you have a kingdom, it doesn't go well with Dharma practice. Or if you have Dharma practice, it doesn't go well with having a kingdom. Okay. So in general, that's usually how it is. But here he's going to explain some more things to the king. So the king here is saying, okay, there's many rulers who behave absolutely abominably towards each other. They make deals, they call each other names, they do espionage, they spy on each other and hack each other's computers in order to influence the elections in another country. They, encourage the enemy to hack your country's government computers. So they behave in really repugnant ways. They sign deals and then they don't keep the deals. They sign treaties, they don't keep the treaties. All sorts of things like that. And so the king is saying, many of the kings act like this. Many of the kings also exploit their populace. Okay? they charge, they let their friends, and especially their wealthy friends, they don't have to pay much tax. But the people who are poor, they tax them a lot because those aren't their friends, and, they don't really care about those people. Okay, they give education to some people, not education to others. Yeah, so the king's saying, this happens a lot. So seeing that that happens a lot, how in the world can I govern without compromising my Dharma principles? Okay, so Nagarjuna is telling him, well, it's possible to do that so that the two don't conflict. And what you need, especially if you're going to do that, is to be generous, kind, and fair. Okay? So to have a generous attitude towards the people you're doing, be kind to them, and be fair and honest. Okay? Then the king says, well, how should I deal with people who harm others by murdering or robbing them? Okay? And so usually the king, makes the law, and those people are imprisoned, they get executed, but doesn't executing people and punishing people and whipping people, isn't that contrary to the Dharma? So how do I deal with criminals? Because if I don't do anything, that's not going to work either, because then the people who are peaceful in the populace are going to be disturbed, and there's just going to be havoc if you don't deal with people who misbehave. Yeah. Okay. So Nagarjuna replies here that nowadays there's many people who deceive, cheat, and harm each other. Gee, really? In Nagarjuna's time and in our time. Okay? So you can't simply allow people who do bad actions to carry on, because that will interfere with the well-being of the virtuous, law-abiding people. You have to do something, otherwise your whole populace is going to be, terrified, and they won't do anything. I mean, they'll just live in fear all the time. Okay? And in addition, then the people who don't behave properly will create a ton more negative karma, which harms them. So for the sake not only of the virtuous population, the law-abiding population, but also for the sake of the people who are the perpetrators of harm, you need to imprison them and stop them from harming, so that they don't create so much negative karma by harming others. Because otherwise you're just letting them create so many, the causes for so many lower rebirths. Okay, so you have to protect the public, to enforce the law, and sometimes that involves punishing, fining, imprisoning, or beating offenders. Okay, so punishing. I think actually the best attitude to have is not that we're punishing because that's justice. We shouldn't have an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of attitude. You harm somebody, now we can vent our anger and harm you back because that's justice. No, if you need to punish somebody, it's because you see that that's the only way you have to communicate to that person that their behavior needs to change. Okay? So you're not punishing because you like to punish, because you have the power to punish, but because in some cases the only way somebody is going to think about their behavior is if they're the things that give them happiness they can't do, or they get some kind of punishment. But I think if you're going to do this, you have to explain that to that person, Because otherwise, if the person thinks you're punishing just as a power trip, then they're going to continue to blame you and they're not going to look at their own behavior. Yeah. But I know for some of the guys, the inmates I work with, because their activities are limited, you know, you can't go out with your friends, you can't do this, you can't do that, then it makes them think, well, what did I do that I wound up here? And that kind of reflection is very useful to them, because then they begin to see, oh, I made some wrong choices here. And they come to understand their wrong choices and what was operating in their own minds that made them make those wrong choices. Okay, so it's in that way that you punish. In terms of beating, in our society, well, some people don't favor beating in prison, but it's certainly allowed if, and inmates are often beaten way too much. People are tortured. Our own government does it. Beaten and tortured to get information. And even though there's international conventions about that. And what's interesting is even in monasteries, that's beating the people who misbehave is I don't know, in China. Well, no, I would assume in China too, and in Tibet, was completely accepted. Yeah. I saw in one of the monasteries where I lived, the little monks, when they misbehaved, there was one older monk, and he would beat them. Not just the little monks, but the teenage ones, the older ones, they would get beaten. And it was pretty heavy. That wasn't so nice for some of us to hear about. But it was acceptable in their culture, And I saw once, when I was in Taiwan for my ordination, there was one nun. What they often did there to punish people is they do it by humiliation, not by physical punishment. So there were some monks who had done some naughty things, I don't know what, and so they had to kneel in front of all 500 of us, face the altar, and hold an incense stick, and they had to stay in that position where everybody could see them and where they got scolded by the master until the incense burned down. Okay, so that's how they were punished. And then there was one time where there was one nun, and I was rather shocked because the master slapped her across the face. And I asked why afterwards, because it was all in Chinese. And it was because she criticized her Dharma teacher. Yeah. And, if you start going around criticizing your Dharma teacher, you're in bad straits, So they did that to kind of emphasize to her that doing that is not helping her at all. Okay. Also in our schools in this country, teachers in many cases are allowed to paddle the kids. Yeah? Not anymore? When I was a teacher, we could. Not anymore?
Changed in the mid-70s.
What?
Most of that changed in the mid-70s.
I think in some places it was earlier.
Well, I was teaching in the early 70s, and in the school that I taught at, we were in an inner city school, and kids were taken to the principals and whacked. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, because there's more violence in the schools, so they have guards who sometimes have to act physically forcefully. But it's not so good when they overdo it. Yeah.
It is still, I believe, that it was in the news, and the
Mhm.
school is accepted in the school to do that.
Yeah.
The parents give permission.
Yeah.
Sadly.
I think, well, that's in certain situations. I know in Alberta, if you did that, you would be out the door the next day.
Mm.
You would be out the door.
Even if a child, if a teenager in high school brought a knife to school and they were going to start knifing somebody on the playground, the guard couldn't physically tackle them and do anything.
A teacher slapping, like as a disciplinary action.
Uh-huh.
In that other situation, you'd have to do what you have to do to keep the rest of people safe.
Yeah, you have to keep them safe. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the penalties laid out in the Vinayak or the monastic code, none of them involve violence.
Right.
And there's no record of the Buddha ever using violence, is there?
Yeah. I can't think of any situation where the Buddha was violent with a disciple. Physically violent. He verbally scolded them. He gave it to them when they needed it. Okay. Yeah, but I can't think of a situation where there was physical violence. And certainly in the Sangha, there's not. However, if people seriously misbehave, I mean, there's a whole system of ways. It's not called punishment. Well, some people, actually, Venerable Benyon called it punishment, but it's a way of making amends where, you may be evicted from the community, suspended from the community for a certain period of time, or you may have to live alone, you may have to sit at the end of the row and serve all the people who are junior to you. Then they have to have a big, if you break certain precepts, then there has to be, 20 people or 40 people, and you have to, they have to reinstate you. So, I mean, it really works on your attachment to reputation. Yeah, because you inconvenience the other members of the community who don't like having to go through all these measures. Yeah, because it takes time and everything from them. And, so there's lots of ways in the monastic community that they don't just say, oh, please don't do that again. Yeah. In some of the things, they give you warnings. And if you don't admit, that you did something, then, yeah, there's definitely, you have to pay the consequences to it. Yeah. The Vinaya in many ways is like a legal code, so it says what the rules are and what breaks transgressions mean, and it also sets out ways for dealing with those kinds of things. Mm-hmm.
Jennifer, when I've heard monks talk about being beaten when they were young monks, for them that would never be violence. I mean, I'm so surprised to hear them say that they take it as a blessing or they take it as a...
No, that's the teachers say, take it as a blessing. We're doing it because we care for you. Whether you're an 8-year-old monk and you really think that is another story.
But I totally get that, but when I hear Geshe Kintsu Wangdak talk about it, when he talks about it, or
Yeah.
Geshe Pelge, it's such a surprise they really say that.
Yeah,
Maybe they
that's
come to it 30 years later.
yes, that's because it's 30 years later. But at the time, I don't think they saw it that way. It's kind of like kids with their parents. We all got disciplined by our parents. I know when I was little, I hated it. And it was only when I was older I began to understand why my parents had to discipline me, and I appreciated it. But at the time I was happy. I didn't want it. I didn't appreciate it. It was mean and everything else. Yeah. So, yeah. And certainly, some of the people who can't take it, they leave the monastery. Yeah? Okay, I'm not saying that that's good. I'm just trying to explain what they do and why they do it, and how, for their culture, that's acceptable. Yeah. For our culture, it's a different thing. But in the big monasteries, they had these what they called the dopes. These big guys who walked around with sticks, and they were the disciplinarians of the monastery, and they were big guys, and they looked kind of ferocious, and some of the monks were afraid of them. Yeah, but if you have a big monastery and you have, a lot of testosterone around, maybe that's how you had to deal with it. Okay, but in any case here, when Nagarjuna is speaking to the king, the purpose of any punishment that's given is to help the person change so that they don't harm others and they don't harm themselves. Okay, so he says the people who enforce the punishments must do so without malice and without anger and with compassion. So that's really hard, especially you have somebody in the monastery who you've been trying to lead on a certain way, and they just don't listen, and they keep, Okay, but the person who does that must have compassion. And then he says you must think clearly how to run the kingdom without contradicting the Dharma. So it's going to come down to really your motivation. And that's what makes it difficult, because when you're in those positions of having to deal with other people, maintaining a good motivation can be quite difficult. So you need to have trained your own mind in the Dharma for quite a while so that you can do those kind of duties without getting angry and upset and holding on to grudges and vengeful and so on and so forth. Okay. And okay, so maybe we'll pause here. Are there questions? Yeah.
I find it very challenging to be in the world
Mm-hmm.
and then there, like having a management position or having a business or whatever, and to rule it by the Dharma. I find it, for me, it's like two separate worlds at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
It could be, it sounds like almost not very possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're saying it sounds almost impossible to keep your Dharma practice and yet run a business and do all those kinds of things in the world. How do you really combine it? And so, like I said, it really comes down to your motivation. And so he's emphasizing that, and Nagarjuna is emphasizing that to the king. He's also giving him suggestions, because if you have good helpers and good ministers and good officials, that really helps you. And then you don't have so many challenging situations where you could get upset. But it's very interesting. At the end of this chapter, at the very end of this chapter, Nagarjuna says to the king, okay, I've explained to you how to do it. It's difficult. If you think you can't live in the world and also practice the Dharma while you're fulfilling your royal duties, then ordain. He says to the king. Yeah. So he's saying, in the end of the day, the Dharma is more important. Okay. Can you imagine saying that to the king? He must have had a very good relationship with the king. Yeah, I wonder sometimes. Maybe Sainath can tell us the history of this king and if he wound up ordaining or not. Other questions? Anything else?
Just a comment, Nicole.
Uh,
The qualities for the military advisors, it would be hard to imagine that you could actually find one person. So this is why Never versus That talks about the importance of education and getting that going so that in the future when you have these potential candidates, maybe there'll be something to choose from.
yeah. Yeah, so certainly with a military advisor, it's difficult to find somebody with those qualities. But I'm sure even now, I mean, they have to seek out people who are intelligent, who are fair. Yeah, because if you have, an educated and polite, I mean, if you look at the Department of Defense and everything, you have to have intelligent, good, fair people in it. And you have to have generals that are intelligent and fair also. Otherwise, the army's just gonna blow up. So, yeah, it's hard to find people with those qualities, but I'm sure nowadays they do the best they can. Yeah?
I was just thinking about, for, I don't know, 12 or so years I worked at a Catholic hospital, and this all reminds me of how the values and what they taught the people that came into the institution and the values they had and the ethics, and there were nuns there and at first that were even running the place.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a shared values with people. That was the most important
Thing, yeah.
to help people that couldn't pay and those kinds of things. But as it seemed like the world got more into the money, and that became more important, it became more of a business, then you could see how all of that started falling away.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So you worked for some years in a Catholic hospital, and the values were being constantly reaffirmed, and they were shared by everybody who was working there, and so people operated on those values of kindness and helping the poor and so on. But as the hospitals became more directed towards business, and they were managed no longer by the monks and nuns, but by business, by administrators, lay administrators, then making money became more important, and those values fell away, unfortunately. Yeah, very.
And when it was still more about the values, any person that worked there had access to the top people. You could
Oh, that's neat. Yeah.
talk to them, you could go to the meetings and speak about a difficulty. That it was very open that way.
Yeah. So in the time when the values were important, anybody in the hospital could go talk to the top person or go to the meetings. Yeah. Well, that's part of the commonly shared values. Yeah, but when it's run like a business, then a whole different set of values.